Hi everybody, I'm Jason Cummings. I'm an instructional designer and faculty experience coordinator with Global Online Academy. In this video I'm going to show you a few things about the Learning Mastery Gradebook in Canvas and what we've learned about the way it works. So as you can see here, the Learning Mastery Gradebook is a separate tab that is set up alongside your traditional gradebook here in Canvas. It takes a bit to load when there's a lot of data in it, so I'm not going to click over here and prove to you that there's a traditional gradebook on the back side of it, but you're just going to have to trust me. Now, the thing to note here is that it puts your outcomes across the top of the gradebook and your students down the left, just like you're used to seeing. And then what it does is it gives you the average in the class for how well your students have mastered each of those outcomes, and then it gives the individual students performance below. And I can, if I hover here, I can take a look at where the class is with each of these individual outcomes. So the first question we need to address, as you would anytime you're looking at adopting a new technology, is why use this? Is this a compelling piece of technology that's going to really enhance your work in your class? And some of the reasons I think you may want to do that are as follows. First, you can see here that I'm in the student learning mastery view. So I've clicked on an individual student, and I'm here now looking at the individual student's view. And you can see the number of outcomes in each competency category that have been mastered. And I can zero in on a student's longitudinal performance with a particular outcome. So for example, let me look at one that has a number of alignments. Presence, you are a consistent presence, logging into the course 5 to 7 times per week. We can see this has been assessed 4 times over the course of the class, and if I hover on these 3 dots, I can see that between the 17th of September and the 26th of April, there has been some growth with this outcome. I can click on the 4 alignments to see exactly what those assignments were and what the student scored on this outcome on those assignments. Now, a second thing you may want to do is use the Learning Mastering Gradebook to zero in on the things you have assessed and the things you have not assessed. Obviously, we don't expect that GOA teachers assess every single outcome a multitude of times, and you may want to limit yourself to the handful that feel really important to you in each competency area. But this view obviously lets you see very clearly the empty columns. And then when you're looking at an individual student, obviously you can see very clearly the number of alignments that there are for each outcome. So those that have many alignments presumably are outcomes that feel very important in that class. And so as a teacher, you may want to use this, A, to determine first which of the outcomes you think you'll be assessing frequently, and B, which of those you indeed have assessed, and then which you may be meaning to assess but have not at a given point in the semester. Third, the Mastering Gradebook is also going to let you use data to make decisions about how you facilitate the course and how you make certain design choices. So for example, let's imagine you have half an hour to reach out to 3 students to give them some coaching going into an upcoming project. You know that maybe this coordination, organized time and tasks, is an outcome on which they'll be assessed in that project. It's something they're working on. So how are you going to use your time? You're going to come here and you're going to click on the outcome and notice that it's sorted for me and showed me very quickly the 3 students that I might want to reach out to with some pointed coaching. On the design side, you might use something like this to determine who you're going to put in which groups, depending on which strengths they've demonstrated based on the data that you've gathered, and any other number of design considerations. The Learning Mastery Gradebook also makes it very easy to provide quick, targeted data and feedback to students who are asking, hey, what can I improve in this class, or what are the areas where I'm having a hard time? Or if you're writing your narrative comments, you can look very quickly at the student display here and tell the students precisely which outcomes they've had a hard time with, and point them in this direction so that they can have a look and assess for themselves which outcomes they're having a hard time. We've seen some particularly powerful reflection exercises where students come in here in the middle of the semester, look at what the data tells them about which outcomes have been strengths and weaknesses for them, and set goals based on that. So it's one other way that you can empower students. Another thing to note is that the Learning Mastery Gradebook will um, collect and aggregate data on assignments that are non-graded assignments, right? So if you look at your traditional gradebook to try to give feedback to a student on his or her skills, you'll see only numbers associated with graded assignments, and that's what produces the grade. In the Learning Mastery Gradebook, it's going to pull in data from rubrics using outcomes, whether they're graded assignments or non-graded assignments. So you could use a rubric like the one I've got here, which has 7 outcomes on it, totaling 35 points. But on the assignment, I set the assignment's grade as 1 point, right? So maybe this is totally just a formative kind of assessment where I want to give the student some feedback, but I don't want it to be worth $1 million in the grade book. This data will all be recorded in the Learning Mastery Gradebook. So formative, summative, graded, non-graded, it can all dump in here. So what are some of the best features of the Learning Mastery Gradebook? First, as we looked at before, it allows you to visualize trends in student work over time. Second, it's going to let you sort the students by a particular outcome to give you a sense for which students you should be targeting with your facilitation and your outreach in order to get the most bang for your buck in terms of your time. Also, you can use weighted averages by going into the outcomes part of Canvas and setting it up so that the most recent assignments are reflected, are weighed the most heavily in terms of these averages that you can see in the Learning Mastery Gradebook. Note that that does not affect the way that those assignments are weighted in the actual gradebook that produces the student's grade, but it does show up in the Learning Mastery Gradebook in order to give you a more complete sense of where the student is at a given point in time. And last, you can use the Learning Mastery Gradebook to design a number of different kinds of reflection and goal-setting exercises where the students come in here and take a look at this stuff themselves and talk about some of the trends they see in their own work and what they think their next steps are going forward. We should also talk about what some of its limitations are. As you may have noted thus far, it doesn't figure a grade, right? Even if you enable this and start using it in your course, it is not going to produce the grade for the student in the class. I have a much longer explanation for a workaround that might work for teachers who are thinking about trying to use the Learning Mastery Gradebook to produce a grade, but for the most part, it's not designed to do that. It's designed to create a complete picture of the feedback students have been getting on certain outcomes and to allow for teachers and students to analyze that feedback and that data in particularly powerful ways. Another limitation to be aware of is that it gets confused if you start putting different point values on your outcomes. So we have all of the default point values on GOA core competencies and outcomes as 5 points, which is to say that's the way they're going to show up in the Learning Mastery Gradebook, assuming you just import them into your course and use them that way. If on a particular assignment you decide that you want a given outcome to count double, for example, you want it to be 10 points, we would caution you against changing it to 10 on that rubric, because what it's going to do is all of a sudden give you an average of 7.5 out of 5 in the Learning Mastery Gradebook, because you gave the kid a 10 out of 10 one time you assessed it, and the Learning Mastery Gradebook understands that that outcome is only out of 5. That's a real shame. One workaround there is that on the rubric you could simply put the outcome once out of 5 and then write it in using the exact same language so it appears a second time on the rubric out of 5 as a total of 10 points. It's kind of an awkward workaround, but it's something you can do. Or you could just simply forego using the Learning Mastery Gradebook for that particular outcome, write it in as a criteria as opposed to as an outcome, and have it be worth 10 points, but it wouldn't show up in the Learning Mastery Gradebook. What else do you need to know in order to get started with this? The Learning Mastery Gradebook is entirely dependent upon the teacher having outcomes set up in Canvas and using them consistently on rubrics. If you don't have these two things going, you can't expect that the Learning Mastery Gradebook is going to do you any good or show you anything that's of much use. So to close up here, I just want to show you how to turn this on in your course. It's very simple. All you have to do is go to Settings and then click on Feature Options, and you'll note that there are two separate buttons here. There's one for the teacher view and there's one for the student view. You may want to turn on just the teacher view first and play around with it yourself before you reveal it to students, although experience tells me that you can turn it on for students and teachers at the same time, because until you explicitly tell your students to go in and toggle over to the Learning Mastery Gradebook, they're not likely to do so. So I hope this gives you a good introduction to what this tool is, what it can do and what it can't do, and what are some things to keep in mind as you start playing with it. Any questions or considerations or ideas, do put them in the back channel in Slack. Do reach out to me specifically on Slack or on Twitter if you're outside of GOA watching this, and we'd be very happy to engage with you.